Imagine stepping beyond the prison gates after 30 long years, not a week, not a month, not a handful of years that still keep you tethered to the familiar. 30 years, a full generation. A lifetime, a world that has advanced, rebuilt, reinvented itself over and over while you remain frozen in time. This story is not about one single person. It is about countless individuals who have walked out after decades of incarceration, blinking into a world that no longer resembles the one they left behind. In the early 1990s, the world looked drastically different. The average person owned no cell phone. The internet wasn't a household term. Amazon referred mostly to a river. GPS existed only in military labs. And technology, at its peak, offered pagers, cassette tapes, and clunky desktop computers with green-tinted monitors. But imagine someone locked away during that era, returning in 2025, and seeing a self-driving car glide silently down the street. The overwhelming sense of dislocation is not simply about technology, it's about a world that moved on without you. The shock of freedom. There is a strange quiet that follows release. Correctional staff often call it the doorway pause. As the newly freed person steps outside, they linger sometimes for seconds, sometimes minutes, trying to reconcile two things: the structure, noise, and containment of incarceration, the boundless unpredictability of the outside world. For someone returning after 30 years, that pause is not just emotional, it is existential. The sounds hit first: cars rushing by at speeds they aren't used to, electric buses that make barely a whisper, people speaking into wireless earbuds, seemingly talking to themselves, digital billboards changing images every 5 seconds, drones humming overhead delivering packages. Even the silence feels different. Prison silence is heavy, tense, intentional. Freedom silence is spacious, airy, and full of possibilities that feel both exciting and terrifying. The sensory overload begins instantly, and for many, it is too much to process at once. When everything familiar is gone, 3 decades behind bars doesn't just freeze time, it erases it. Families age, children grow up, parents pass away, neighborhoods transform. Old homes are sold or demolished, friend groups dissolve. The world outside the gates offers no continuity. There is no soft landing. People returning after long sentences often describe walking into a life that is technically theirs, yet completely foreign. A stranger stands in the place of a once young sibling. A neighborhood no longer resembles the one they grew up in. A childhood home is now a parking lot, a duplex, a shopping center. Even those lucky enough to reunite with family face an emotional mismatch. Loved ones continue aging and evolving for 30 years. They experience births, deaths, jobs, breakups, triumphs, heartbreak, new habits, new beliefs, new routines. But the person returning feels as if they've stepped through a time portal. Their last memories of home are dust-covered snapshots of a world that no longer exists. This dislocation is not a single moment, it's a constant echo, one that follows them day after day. The technology gap, the largest shock, one that no reentry program can fully prepare someone for, is the rise of modern technology. Imagine seeing a smartphone for the first time. A flat glass device with no buttons that unlocks using a face. A machine that can call anywhere, navigate anywhere, and summon a stranger to drive you home. To someone who left before the internet era, this isn't convenience, it's science fiction come to life. Touchscreens feel unnatural. Apps feel confusing. Everything requires an account, a password, a 2-step verification, an email, a phone number they don't even have yet. Even buying food becomes a maze. Digital self-checkout systems, tap-to-pay cards, QR code menus, and then comes AI voice assistants that answer questions, algorithms recommending content, digital systems scanning faces at airports and stores, chatbots handling job applications. For many newly freed individuals, the technology gap is not a mild inconvenience, it is a barrier to participation in the modern world. Some describe the transition as being reborn as an adult but expected to understand everything immediately. In reality, the world expects them to adjust in days to things the rest of us learned slowly over decades. Time as the real punishment. People often talk about incarceration in terms of rules, restrictions, or loss of mobility. But the real punishment, the part no one fully understands unless they've lived it, is the loss of time. 30 years is enough time for entire music genres to rise and fate, cities to rebuild skylines, political landscapes to shift repeatedly, social norms to redefine themselves, technology to evolve across 5 generations, families to completely reorganize, childhood acquaintances to become grandparents when someone returns after decades. They do not just re-enter society, they re-enter a new era. Every street looks different. Every process has changed. Every social interaction follows new rules. The result is something experts call temporal shock, a form of psychological displacement where the mind struggles to reconcile the timeline it lived with the timeline it has returned to. Freedom is supposed to feel like liberation, but for many, it carries the weight of a grief they never had time to process, the loneliness of a moved-on world. Perhaps the most haunting part of returning after 30 years is the isolation. People build new lives. They move forward. They adapt. But the person returning can't simply fast forward 30 years of emotional development. They carry the mindset, habits, fears, and survival instincts of someone who lived in a high-control environment for decades. They are surrounded by motion yet feel completely still inside. Friends who promised to wait couldn't. Family who visited monthly in the 90s stopped by the mid-2000s. The support system that seemed strong in year 1 eroded slowly as time marched on, even when loved ones still cared deeply. The emotional gap is enormous. Hugs feel unfamiliar. Conversations feel stilted. Relationships must be rebuilt from scratch. Freedom becomes a paradox. You are surrounded by people, yet you have never felt more alone. The weight of new responsibilities for decades. Every decision was made for them. When to wake, when to sleep, when to eat, when to stand in line, when to exercise, when to return to their cell, when to speak, and when to stay silent. To suddenly have freedom means having constant responsibility. A grocery store becomes overwhelming. Every aisle is a choice. Every choice requires confidence. Confidence they haven't needed in decades. Crosswalks, traffic, noise, everything requires awareness. Even small tasks like operating a microwave or navigating a debit card feel like obstacles. Freedom is not simply walking out. It is learning how to live again. The world's new rules society in 2025 operates on unspoken expectations. Answer texts quickly, keep up with trends, use digital tools, maintain online presence, understand social cues shaped by the internet era. People returning from decades of incarceration often feel like foreigners in their own country. The way people speak has changed. Slang, gestures, cultural references, none of it matches their mental library. Even humor feels alien. And then there are social rules shaped by technology. Don't call without texting first. Don't knock on someone's door unannounced. Don't leave voicemails. Don't expect in-person communication when digital will do for someone absent from society for 30 years. These norms feel arbitrary, confusing, even isolating. The world has a new language, one they never got the chance to learn. The first night of freedom for many, the first night outside prison walls, is not joyful. It is terrifying. The quiet is unfamiliar. The absence of rigid schedules is unsettling. The feeling of being unmonitored is disorienting. Some describe waking up every hour, convinced they will be pulled back. Some feel guilty sleeping on a soft bed, unsure if they deserve it. Some struggle to process the lack of noise, the absence of shouting, radios, clanging doors. Freedom is not a switch. It is a long, uneven climb. Some climb with support, others climb alone. Many stumble, but all carry the same haunting truth. The world they return to is not the world they left. Freedom after 30 years is often imagined as a moment of joy, sunlight, open air, the weight of confinement lifted at last. But for many who re-enter society after decades, the emotional reality is far more complicated. Freedom is not simply a door opening. It is the sudden awareness of everything that has been lost. Time is not just measured in years, it is measured in birthdays missed, memories never formed, conversations never had, and a world that evolved without you. And when someone steps into freedom after decades, the emotional weight of all that absence arrives at once. The grief is not loud, it doesn't scream. It sits quietly on the chest, heavy and unmoving. This chapter explores the internal landscape of that weight, the psychological impact of time, the silent grief of returning to a changed world, and the emotional rebuilding that begins only once the prison gates close behind them, the quiet grief. Nitrogen monoxide 1 talks about people are often told to celebrate release, to smile, to feel grateful. Society expects joy, relief, excitement. But many returning individuals feel something far more complex, a sadness they can't put into words. It is not sadness about leaving prison. It is sadness about everything they left behind. And everything they can never get back. 3 decades of life are gone, years when the world turned without them. Years filled with laughter they never heard, milestones they never witnessed, and changes they weren't around to understand. This grief doesn't show itself in dramatic breakdowns. It shows in moments, the first time someone sees a photograph of a sibling now older than their parents were when they left. The first time they dial a phone number that no longer exists. The first time they walk into a home filled with faces who know them, but whom they barely recognize. The emotional shock is not a single moment, it is a rolling wave. Some describe it as mourning their own life while still alive. The emptiness of missed milestones. Incarceration steals milestones in a way no other experience does. 30 years can erase an entire personal timeline. Birthdays, graduations, weddings, anniversaries all unfold without the person who should have been there. For many, the most painful realization arrives when they look at family. A son is now older than they were when they were incarcerated. A niece they once held as a baby now has children of her own. Parents who once sent weekly letters now only exist in memories. Entire family branches were born while they were gone. Time creates distance. Distance becomes unfamiliarity. Unfamiliarity becomes emotional disconnection. And then comes the confusing, heavy question, who am I to these people now? There is no handbook for how to reenter a family after being gone for decades. Relationships must be rebuilt from scratch, but the emotional foundations are missing. Some family members adapt, some struggle, some move on entirely. The person returning often ends up asking themselves, have I come home to a family, or to a history I am no longer part of? The fear of making mistakes. For decades, prison life demands hyper-awareness, caution, and routine. Every action carries consequences. Every misstep can escalate. So when someone re-enters the world outside, the freedom to choose becomes overwhelming. Simple tasks feel high stakes, choosing what to eat, navigating a crosswalk using public transportation, talking to a stranger asking for help, making a plan for tomorrow. The fear is not irrational, it is conditioned. For 30 years, mistakes meant punishment. Punishment meant danger. Danger meant survival decisions. Suddenly, choices are everywhere, and responsibility rests fully on the individual. Many describe the early days of release as carrying an invisible pressure. I'm afraid to do anything wrong. I don't want to disappoint anyone. What if I can't function out here? Freedom feels fragile, and the fear of missteps makes some tiptoe through the world as if it might collapse beneath them. The internal conflict of identity. Who are you when your life paused 30 years ago? The world defines people by age, accomplishments, jobs, skills, relationships. But incarceration suspends personal identity. It freezes it at the age someone entered. Emotionally, they may still feel 25. Physically, they are 55. Socially, they are new to a world shaped by trends, norms, and technologies they never experienced. Identity becomes blurry. They were once a parent, a partner, a student, a worker, a dreamer, but 30 years later, those identities are no longer intact. Many wrestle with questions like, what is my purpose now? What do I have to offer? Who am I supposed to be? What future do I even imagine? This is not a crisis that resolves quickly. It is a slow, emotional excavation, digging through layers of time, trauma, change, and lost years to rebuild a sense of self. The pain of modern social expectations. Modern society moves fast to fast. Conversations are brief. Communication is digital. People multitask constantly. Attention spans feel short. For someone who spent 30 years in an environment governed by structure and rules, modern social dynamics can feel chaotic. The speed of conversation is overwhelming. People interrupt more. Jokes reference memes or shows they've never heard of. Slang changes yearly. Humor is layered with sarcasm and internet culture. Even friendliness feels different. People are warmer in text messages than in person. Smiles are brief. Eye contact varies by generation. Small talk happens through apps. The emotional disconnect becomes, "This world feels too fast for me. I feel out of place." Everywhere I go, loneliness intensifies not because people don't care, but because the emotional rhythm of society feels foreign. The emotional disconnect becomes, "This world feels too fast for me. I feel out of place everywhere I go." Loneliness intensifies not because people don't care, but because the emotional rhythm of society feels foreign. The trauma of reintegration. Psychologists often compare long-term incarceration to living in a world with a different climate, different rules, different expectations, different ways to survive. Re-entering normal life after decades can trigger anxiety in open spaces, panicking crowds, difficulty sleeping, hypervigilance, discomfort around loud noises, stress from decision-making, fear of unfamiliar social behavior, emotional withdrawal, avoidance of new situations. Even well-meaning support can feel overwhelming. Some returning individuals are praised for their freedom, not realizing how emotionally heavy that freedom feels. Freedom is not instant peace. It's the beginning of a long healing process, reconciling with the passage of time. One of the most profound emotional impacts comes from simply realizing how old the world has become. Buildings look newer, skylines are different, clothing styles changed a dozen times, music sounds unfamiliar, cultural references mean nothing. Entire movements reshaped society. Even nature feels different. Cities have more green spaces, more electric vehicles hum instead of roar, and public spaces operate under new rules. Returning to society after 30 years is like stepping into a film already halfway through. Everyone knows the plot. Everyone knows the characters. Everyone speaks the same cultural language. Everyone understands the world they live in, except the person now starting from zero. This sense of being out of sync creates a deep emotional ache, one rooted in the awareness that the world grew up while they stayed the same age inside. The emotional burden of starting over. Freedom after decades is not just a return, it's a beginning. Many face a harsh, emotional truth. They are starting their entire adult life at an age when many people begin slowing down. While peers are preparing for retirement, they are preparing for their first job, their first apartment, their first cell phone, their first email address. Life feels upside down. There is pressure to catch up, pressure to prove themselves, pressure to show gratitude, pressure to never inconvenience anyone, and beneath it all lies the haunting question, can I build a life? At this age, the unseen courage of reentry. Despite the emotional challenges, the confusion, the grief, and the overwhelming reality of a world that evolved without them, many individuals display a quiet strength that goes unseen by society. Reentry after 30 years requires courage, patience, humility, emotional endurance, willingness to learn, willingness to fail, willingness to rebuild, hope for belonging, hope for purpose, hope for a future not defined by the past, hope for a world that has room for them, even after so much time has passed. It is not easy. It is not simple. It is not fast. But the emotional resilience required to step into an unfamiliar world and start over at zero is extraordinary. This is the part of the story most people never see. Freedom after 30 years is not an ending. It is not closure. It is not a return to normal. It is a beginning, one that starts without instructions, without certainty, and without the luxury of time for those released after decades of incarceration. The real challenge begins not at the prison gates, but in the days, months, and years that follow. Rebuilding a life in a world that has evolved without you requires more than survival skills. It requires patience, emotional strength, and the ability to learn how to live again, often from the ground up. This chapter explores what rebuilding looks like when the past is heavy, the future is uncertain, and the present feels unfamiliar, starting from zero. One of the hardest realities of reentry after long-term incarceration is realizing that adulthood must begin again. Many individuals step into freedom with no savings, no recent work history, no digital footprint, no credit, no references, limited job skills relevant to modern industries. Everything that society expects an adult to have has to be built from scratch. Opening a bank account feels intimidating. Applying for a job feels overwhelming. Signing a lease feels out of reach. The systems that organize modern life, online applications, digital forms, background checks, were not designed with decades-long incarceration in mind. For someone just learning how to use email, the process alone can feel impossible. Rebuilding requires humility, asking for help, admitting confusion, learning slowly, and doing all of it in a world that expects speed. Navigating employment in a modern economy, work is often seen as the gateway to stability, identity, and dignity. But employment after decades of incarceration comes with layered obstacles. Technology-driven workplaces, automation, online hiring platforms, digital resumes, interview expectations shaped by modern corporate culture. Many jobs now require skills that didn't exist 30 years ago. Even entry-level positions demand familiarity with computers, scheduling software, online communication, customer service standards shaped by social media. And then there is the record disclosure laws vary, but the emotional burden of explaining a past that spans decades never disappears. Some employers are understanding, many are hesitant, some never call back. Rebuilding through employment becomes a long process of rejection, learning, and persistence. Yet for those who succeed, work becomes more than income, it becomes proof of belonging. Learning to trust freedom after decades of confinement. Freedom does not automatically feel safe. There is no bell telling you when to sleep, no count determining when to move, no officer monitoring every decision. For many, this absence of structure creates anxiety. Some individuals recreate routines to feel grounded. Others struggle with the lack of boundaries. Some feel guilt enjoying simple comforts. Freedom requires trust, not just in the world, but in oneself. Trust that mistakes won't erase progress. Trust that missteps aren't fatal. Trust that independence won't lead to punishment. Learning to trust freedom is often one of the longest parts of reentry. Building new connections, relationships are both healing and challenging after long-term incarceration. Old connections may no longer exist. Family dynamics may feel strained. Friendships require rebuilding on unfamiliar terms. At the same time, forming new relationships feels risky. Trust doesn't come easily after years of living in survival mode. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Social cues feel unclear, yet human connection remains essential. Many find support through reentry programs, faith communities, support groups, mentorship programs, employment networks, counseling services. These spaces provide something invaluable: understanding without judgment. For many, these new connections become chosen families, people who understand the journey without requiring explanation. The role of support systems. Successful reentry after decades is rarely achieved alone. Access to stable housing, job training, mental health care, and social services significantly improves outcomes, but support systems are uneven. Availability depends on location, funding, and policy. Those who lack support face higher risks of isolation, mental health struggles, and instability. Reentry is not just a personal challenge, it is a societal responsibility. When people are released without preparation or support, the burden of adjustment becomes heavier than it needs to be. Communities that invest in reentry invest in long-term safety, dignity, and human potential. Redefining success for someone rebuilding after 30 years, success looks different. It is not measured by wealth or status. It is measured by stability, consistency, peace. Success can mean holding a steady job, paying rent on time, cooking meals at home, sleeping through the night, managing stress without fear, building routines, maintaining healthy relationships, feeling safe in one's own life. These quiet victories rarely make headlines, but they matter. The slow healing process, healing after decades of incarceration, is not linear. Some days feel hopeful, others feel overwhelming. Progress is often uneven. Triggers appear unexpectedly. Memories resurface. Emotions long suppressed demand attention. Therapy, peer support, and self-reflection become tools for understanding the past without being consumed by it. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating the past into a future that still holds meaning. The question of belonging at its core, rebuilding a life after decades, comes down to one fundamental question: do I belong here? Belonging is not automatic. It must be built through participation, contribution, and connection. For many, belonging emerges slowly, through work, through service, through showing up consistently, through realizing that time lost does not erase human worth. Freedom redefined. Freedom after decades is not the absence of walls. It is the presence of choice. Choice to grow, choice to learn, choice to heal, choice to contribute, choice to imagine a future. It is imperfect. It is difficult. It is fragile, but it is real. And for those who walk out after 30 years, rebuilding a life is an act of quiet courage, one step at a time, in a world that has moved on, yet still holds space for them. Final thought: the story of freedom after decades of incarceration is not a single story. It is many lives, many journeys, many struggles, many second chances. It challenges us to rethink what justice, rehabilitation, and reintegration truly mean, because freedom does not end at release. For many, it begins there,